أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد أشرف الخلق وسيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا سهلا. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. اللهم أخرجنا من ظلمات الوهم إلى نور الفهم وأكرمنا بمعرفة العلم وزين أخلاقنا بالحلم يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما واجعل علمنا حجة لنا لا علينا. اللهم اغفر لنا ما قدمنا وما أخرنا وما أسررنا وما أعلنا وما أسرفنا وما أنت أعلم به منا. اللهم أصلحنا وأصلح قلوبنا. اللهم أصلح قلوبنا. اللهم أصلح قلوبنا. اللهم اغفر زلاتنا. اللهم اغفر زلاتنا. اللهم اغفر زلاتنا. اللهم أصلح بالعلم قلوبنا. اللهم خلص قلوبنا من النفاق وأعمالنا من الرياء وألسنتنا من الكذب وأعيننا من الخيانة. اللهم طهر قلوبنا من كل عيب أنت به عليم. اللهم ربنا برئ قلوبنا من النفاق. اللهم اسلل سخيمة قلوبنا. اللهم وفقنا لما تحبه وترضاه. اللهم وفقنا لما تحبه وترضاه. اللهم بلغنا رمضان. اللهم بلغنا رمضان. اللهم أعنا على صيامه وعلى قيامه على الوجه الذي يرضيك عنا واكتبنا فيه من عتقائك من النار. اللهم اعتق رقابنا من النار. اللهم اعتق رقابنا ورقاب آبائنا وأمهاتنا وإخواننا وأخواتنا وأزواجنا وذرياتنا من النار وادخلنا الجنة مع الأبرار يا عزيز يا غفار. مع الأبرار يا عزيز يا غفار. اللهم اجعله رمضان فتح ونصر وتمكين لأمة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها. O Allah, we call upon you, we pray to you, beseech you, we ask you by your names and attributes. We ask you, O Allah, to better us and to forgive us and to guide us and to make us steadfast and to enable us to seek a path of goodness that brings us closer to your pleasure. We ask you, O Allah, to rid our hearts of all toxins and all toxicity. Remove from our hearts all diseases. We ask you, Allah, to give us spiritual clarity and spiritual understanding. We ask you, Allah, to bless us with beneficial knowledge and to guide us to the best of action. Make us of those who live in the shade of your pleasure, striving for your rida. Make us of those who have hearts that are endowed with taqwa and ihsan, pursuing that which is best, pursuing your Jannah. We ask you, Allah, to immerse our souls with your forgiveness. We ask you, Allah, to immerse our souls with your forgiveness. O Allah, we ask you to make these hours spent in the masjid seeking knowledge a means for our betterment. Make it a means for our betterment. Don't make it proof against us on the Day of Judgment. Make it proof for us. Make it done sincerely for your sake. And give us the best of this time that's spent in seeking knowledge and in seeking nearness to you, Ya Allah. We ask you, O Allah, to make our pursuit of knowledge a means for our spiritual clarity and our spiritual guidance and fulfillment. We ask you, Allah, to bless us to witness Ramadan. Make us of those who excel in seeking your pleasure in Ramadan, with praying, with fasting, with dua, with reading the Quran, with doing acts of goodness and service to others. We ask you, Allah, to emancipate our necks from hellfire in the blessed month of Ramadan. Our necks and our families' necks, our parents, our spouses, our children, and in the entire ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in the east and west. We ask you, O Allah, to make us of those who are guided to the best of actions. Make the best of our actions the last of our actions. Make the best of our days the last of our days. And the best of all days, the day we meet you and you're pleased with us, Ya Rabbil Alameen. Ameen, ameen. Wa akhir da'wana and alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Amma ba'd, welcome to you all to this intensive that we have on a very special and profound book written by Imam al-Ghazali titled Bidayat al-Hidayah, The Beginning of Guidance. There's a lot to say about the book, but before I go any further, I wanted to make a dua for the nephew of our dear brother Basir. His name is Abdul Rahim, and he is diagnosed with cancer in his urinary tract. And we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to give him shifa and afiyah, and to give him full recovery, and every ill person from the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and to accept those who passed away before us, and to accept our martyrs, Allahumma ameen. اللهم اشفيه شفاء تاما لا يغادر سقما. نسأل الله العظيم رب العرش العظيم أن يشفيهم مما يؤذيه. نسأل الله العظيم رب العرش العظيم أن يشفيهم مما يؤذيه. نسأل الله العظيم رب العرش العظيم أن يشفيهم مما يؤذيه. اللهم داويه بدوائك واشفيه بشفائك ورده إلى كامل صحته برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم اشف كل مريض من أمة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم أنت به عليم. اللهم يا ربنا إنا نسألك أن تجعل هذا العمل الصالح خيرا ونفعا لأمة حبيبك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. نسألك يا ربنا أن تنشر علينا من خزائن رحماتك ما تفك بها كربات إخواننا في غزة وفي فلسطين. اللهم فك عنهم كرباتهم، اللهم فك عنهم كرباتهم، اللهم ثبت أقدامهم، اللهم ثبت أقدامهم، اللهم كن لهم ناصرا ومعينا ومؤيدا وظهيرا. اللهم انصرهم على القوم الظالمين، اللهم انصرهم على القوم الظالمين، اللهم انصرهم على القوم الظالمين. اللهم اقطع دابر الظالمين، اللهم اقطع دابرهم، اللهم اقطع دابرهم، اللهم أزل دولتهم، اللهم أزل دولتهم، اللهم زلزل الأرض من تحت أقدامهم، اللهم اهزمهم وزلزلهم ومزقهم كل ممزق مزقته لأعدائك انتصارا لأوليائك وأحبابك يا رب العالمين. آمين آمين. As we're beginning this book, brothers and sisters, yes. As we're beginning this book, brothers and sisters, and as, by the way, if you do not have a copy, you can get one from Sister Maryam by registering, inshallah. As we said before, as we're beginning it, it's very important to note the following. This book that we're going to be reading together for the next few hours, our read of it is meant to be an experiential read. What does that mean? It's not about the information per se. It's not about getting through every line and every single page. There's a ton of information here that we could spend hours and hours going over. But it's a very spiritual text. And the idea is, even if I get a percentage of what's in this book from guidance, I will find that it'll completely change and alter my life. Change everything about the way I live. That's what this book is meant to do. It's called the beginning of guidance, and some people, when they hear that, they might misunderstand. They might think that it's a book for new Muslims coming to Islam. But truly, every single one of us is meant to be endeavoring on this path of guidance until the last of our days. If I ever think I'm guided, then I should know full well that I'm not. If I think I got it all figured out and there's no room left for improvement, then I'm truly experiencing spiritual decadence and a progressed state of spiritual ruin. Whenever I see myself in this aggrandized image, I'm complete, I am whole, I am good, I do excellent things, then I've completely missed out on the true understanding of what it means to pursue Allah's pleasure and what it means to pursue knowledge and what it means to be on this journey to Allah Azza wa Jal. So brothers and sisters, as we're starting out this text together, please make sure that you keep that in mind. Make your soul present before you make your mind present. Make your mind fuel the power of your soul. Make your mind fuel the power of your soul. And you'll find that you'll be able to walk away with the benefit that's found in the words of Imam al-Ghazali. And truly, that's what this tandem, or I guess this trio, is. That's what this trio of mind, body, and soul is meant to do when it works together. This trio, the body, the outer dimension of my existence, the soul, the inward dimension of my existence, and the mind, the mind which is the fuel for both of these, and the advisor for my heart, my spiritual heart. When these all come together as they're supposed to, that is when I will truly find that I'm achieving what's meant to be achieved on the spiritual path. So that's a little bit of an introduction. And you know, Imam Ghazali actually, he wrote this book for that purpose. if you look at the book through that lens, you'll find that the first thing that he starts with is giving guidance on how to seek spiritual knowledge. That's the first thing that he goes over. And then after that, he goes over the etiquettes of the outer dimension, the acts of worship. How should I be worshiping Allah Azza wa Jal? Not in terms of fiqhi rulings, not in terms of how to do ruku' and how to do sujood and how to do qiyam and so on and so forth, but in terms of the etiquettes that govern all that, the adab. This is a beginning of a discussion that actually will be continuing in next week's intensive, if you haven't heard about it yet, with Shaykh Yasser and I. It's an adab intensive that'll continue that meaning just there. So there's a way to approach worship that makes it more impactful. You'll find that perhaps in the outer dimension of things, two people may do the same exact actions, but have very, very, very different results. Right? This is a reality of worship that we learn through the works of Imam Ghazali. He actually wrote many books. The works of Imam Ghazali, Abu Hamid, are very, very blessed. His most monumentous work is called Ihya Ulumuddin, the revival of the teachings of religion. And this book has been translated, has been summarized and abridged, has been explained by scholars throughout the centuries. Imam Ghazali was a man who lived about 1,000 years ago. He passed away in the year 505. Hijri. We're talking about Hijri calendar. He passed away in the year 505, and we are currently in the year 1445. So 50 more years, and Imam Ghazali will be officially 1,000 years gone from this dunya. But his works are still very much alive and present. Very much alive and present, inspiring generations. So that's about the first part of this book. How should I seek knowledge? What is the etiquette of worship? And then what are the principles that govern the inner dimension of the religion? My soul. What is impacting my soul? What do sins do to me? What do they do to my mind? What do they do to my my eyes, my ears, my tongue, my stomach? And my feet, the rest of my body. How is it impacted by the spiritual dimension? That's the second part of the book. And the third part of the book, after speaking about the individual inwardly and outwardly, Imam Ghazali then tells us some etiquettes about companionship. And we have two forms of companionship for us in the spiritual journey. Two forms of companionship. The first form of this companionship is companionship to Allah. What should govern that and direct that and guide that? And then we have companionship to people through various spheres of interaction, friendships, acquaintances, family, children. What are the principles that govern all that? That's what he speaks about in the third part of this book. So you see, the approach of this book is primarily very, very spiritual, focusing on the individual first before focusing on the relationships. Because there's no way I could figure out the relationships if I don't figure out the individual. And then when I come to figure out the individual, there's no way I could figure out the individual without focusing on the two dimensions of my being, the inward and the outward. People search a lifetime for the inward, and they find it when they convert to Islam. That's a reality. They search a lifetime for the inward, and then when they see what Islam does to the inward reality, your soul, they taste it, they never want to leave it ever again. That's the reality of it. So this book is actually very, very uniquely set up with this guidance, and I hope we could approach it with this understanding. My body and my soul will be fueled by the information base that is feeding it. That's the reality. My body and my soul will be fueled by the information base that is feeding it. Meaning that if my thought and my source of information is fluff, is nonsense, is petty, is very materialistic, very worldly, then guess what? there's no way that my soul could ever experience the spiritual and the immaterial. That's the setup that he goes in. Now, let's actually take a look at this PowerPoint here, by the way. We have a PDF being presented to you here. And this is going to be available to you guys. I don't know if it's already available, if it's been shared on the WhatsApp group or not. But hopefully at some point today, Sister Maryam will share with you guys the PowerPoint so you could keep it for your records. It is basically supplemental information for the contents of the book. I really want to focus on the book. I really want to get us to connect to the book. But the PowerPoint will help fill in some of the blanks, give us an idea. The contents of this book, what are they? There's an introduction about the spiritual pursuit of knowledge. And then there is chapter 1 on acts of obedience, chapter 2 on acts of disobedience, and then we have, or on refraining from acts of disobedience, and then the etiquette of companionship with the Creator and creation. The introduction, this is a little bit about the book, and I already gave you an idea, so we don't need to read that again, but you could read it on your own as it is described. There's a little bit about the author over there, Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. Again, as I said, he passed away in the year 505. He tells you that he was born in 450 in the area of Tus, right? He's Imam Ghazali. He's a Tusi, and that's in what's now known as Iran. Actually, many of the scholars of Islam come from those regions. Now, of course, Iran today is known for the Shia sect, but if you study historically, in fact, that's a new reality. That's only in recent centuries. If you go back several centuries ago, it was actually one of the main hubs of learning in the history of Islam. You find many great scholars of Islam in the various disciplines coming out from those regions. Brilliant minds. Scholars of hadith, like Imam Tirmidhi, right? Like Imam Abu Dawood, like Ibn Majah. These scholars, you'll find they come from various regions in Iran, from areas of like Sijistan or Tus or Tirmidh. And these areas produced a lot of scholarship. Or scholars in other fields like theology or tafsir, like Imam al-Razi or Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, who was a very well-known Shafi'i jurist. So he was born in those areas. He studied under one of the great theologians and jurists of our past. His name is Imam al-Haramain, Imam al-Juwayni. And he produced a number of texts on Islamic law. Many people today know Imam Ghazali for his spiritual texts. But in fact, he is just as prominent and even more prominent for his juristic texts, his fiqh books. He wrote books in usul al-fiqh like al-Mustasfa. And he wrote books in fiqh Shafi'i, the Shafi'i fiqh school like al-Basit and al-Wajiz and al-Khulasa. All of these are works of Imam Ghazali, a great scholar of our past. And so that's a little bit about his life. And you could continue reading the rest of it. There you go. He passed away in 505, which amounts to the year 1111, according to Common Era. So 1111. According to Common Era, the solar calendar, yani, he's actually over 1,000 years ago, right? Because we're in 2023. You guys know why there's a difference between the Hijri and the Common Era? It's obvious. It's because a lot of people don't realize this. There's like about an 11-day difference every single year between the lunar calendar and the solar calendar. So if you live for about 30 lunar years, 30 odd lunar years, then you're actually a year older according to the lunar calendar as opposed to the solar calendar. So the Prophet ﷺ, for example, he passed away at what age, according to most? When did the Prophet ﷺ pass away? 63. By or 63 odd lunar years amounts to 60 years and some change in the solar calendar. That's just a fun fact. So if you ask someone, when did the Prophet, how old was the Prophet when he passed away, and he tells you 63, ask him a follow-up question to make yourself look smart. No, I'm just kidding. Ask him a follow-up question. No, tell me according to the solar calendar. There you go. And those people, so at a certain point in your growth, right, people when they're younger, they want to be older. And then people who are older, they want to be younger. So if you're in the younger bracket and you want to be older, say your age in the lunar calendar and you'll be a little bit older. You're actually a year or two older than, probably a year if you're on the younger side. If you're 2 years difference, then you're on the older side of the bracket. So some people, they're 70 and they're young, mashallah. 80 and they're young. Younger than people in their 20s, mashallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless. Anyway, look, the building blocks of spirituality, before we get into this text, and this is something that we would detail more in a class on purification of the soul. In order for me to really experience spiritual clarity, there's things I need to do. I need to, first off, remove all the toxicity that's inside. There's no way that I'm going to feel the sweetness of khushu' in salah if I'm doing kaba'ir outside of salah. Or if I'm doing all of the most, heinous and deplorable acts. If I really want spiritual peace, the first thing I got to do is plug the holes that are leading to corruption. That's what I need to do. The second thing after that is I need to beautify my soul with those things that bring it nur, bring nur to the heart, right? That's the second step. And then the third step is, once I do these two, I'll become a person who is very spiritually aware, has this spiritual sensitivity, right? So, as we said, there is in Islam, and we're turning the slides to the slide that's the inward and the outward. In Islam, there's an inner dimension and then there's an outer dimension. Islam doesn't allow us to become ritual people. If I really expose myself to the contents of guidance in Islam, there's no way I could be a ritual person. What do I mean by ritual person? Meaning that I fast. Why? Because I grew up fasting. And the best thing about Ramadan is the sweets, the qatayif, the kunafa, mash'arifeh, and there's nothing wrong with those things. You're feel free to like those things if you'd like. But if that's the first thing that stands out in the mind when Ramadan's coming around the corner, then I need to make myself a little bit more focused and in tune with the spiritual. That's all that means. So there's an inner dimension, outer dimension. Ritualism is this toxic force that corrupts true sense of religiosity. What does that mean? Ritualism is what causes someone to look a certain way and act a very, very different way. Have a kufi and a beard and a thobe, and then go outside and lie and cheat and steal. That's what ritualism does. Ritualism does this. I could wear my hijab and perhaps even niqab, and I will backbite and gossip and slander and this and that, and so on and so forth. That's ritualism. Spiritualism actually involves me looking at things with a different eye. I'm going to look deeper here. When I pray, what's the meanings behind prayers? When I fast, what's the meaning behind fasting? Prophet ﷺ trains me to act like this too. Prophet ﷺ, when it comes to fasting, he tells us, perhaps someone might fast and only gets from his fasting thirst and hunger. And perhaps someone might pray qiyam and gets from his qiyam sahar, exhaustion. رب صائم ليس له من صيامه إلا الجوع والعطش ورب قائم ليس له من قيامه إلا السهر. So there's an inner dimension and there's an outer dimension. And there are things that govern both the inward and the outward. There are commands that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to do, and there's prohibitions that He tells us to avoid. Right? And this is mentioned in the Quran. قُلْ إِنَّمَا حَرَّمَ رَبِّيَ الْفَوَاحِشِ مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا وَمَا بَطَنَ. Allah prohibited those fawahish, those acts of immorality that are overt, outward, on the outside, and those that are inward and subtle. What are the inward fawahish? The scholars, they explain it. The concealed immoralities, that's like the disease of the heart. ostentation, animosity, jealousy, bad assumption, hypocrisy, so on and so forth, right? And that's why they mention in this beautiful quote, they mention this, تُطَبِّبُ جِسْمَكَ الْفَانِي لِيَبْقَى وَتَتْرُكُ قَلْبَكَ الْبَاقِي مَرِيضًا. They said that doesn't make any sense. How could you possibly do this? How can you accept this equation? You continue to treat your body, your physical body, that will inevitably wither, yet you abandon your spiritual heart so that you may remain ailing for the rest of your days. That's what he's saying here. If I don't cure and medicate my spiritual heart, no matter what condition my physical body is in, I'll never be happy. I might have a fleeting sense of happiness, right? Like someone feels when they go to a fun place or a nice trip or get some nice new things. A fleeting sense of happiness, and all that comes crashing down soon after that. So these are the spiritual foundations of knowledge. Knowledge is meant to make me a better person. If it doesn't, then what use is knowledge that doesn't make me better? Now, Allah Azza wa Jal mentions this sense of knowledge in the Quran in many verses, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَرْفَعِ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مِنْكُمْ وَالَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْعِلْمَ دَرَجَاتٍ. Allah will raise those who have believed among you and those who were given knowledge by degrees. What knowledge? Information? No. That's not the knowledge that's being sought. The knowledge that is being referred to is the knowledge that makes a person more humble before his Creator, more dutiful in his responsibilities, better in his character, more refined in his speech. That's the knowledge that is being referred to here in this verse. هَلْ يَسْتَوِي الَّذِينَ يَعْلَمُونَ وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. That's the second verse, Surah Zumar. Verse 9. Are they the same, the ones who know and the ones who don't? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking about spiritual knowledge. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he says in the hadith, مَنْ يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. Whoever Allah wants goodness for, He'll give him an understanding of religion. What is this coveted understanding, brothers and sisters? That is the knowledge of the heart. The knowledge of what brings me closer to my Creator. Right? إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاءِ. Those who truly have khashya and humble submission before Allah Azza wa Jal are people of understanding. Who are those? That's spiritual knowledge. Right? So that's the introduction to this. Now, of course, knowledge in the sense of information, that's something that doesn't necessarily lead to goodness. Now, it can, if it's properly utilized, but it could also lead to corruption. And that's why they say that someone who has a lot of information is heavily prone to what? To arrogance. Why? Because I feel power and I feel influence. I feel that I could make people listen to me because I'm very strong in my arguments, right? قوي الحجة. I feel the power that I could run laps around other people. I might have a lot of information and tidbits, and these things might not change me in the slightest. That's a'udhu billah. That's one of the worst consequences that might come with knowledge that is not guided by spirituality. Look at this very beautiful quote here. You see, knowledge and humility. It's quoted by Ibn Jama'ah. What does he say? He says knowledge has 3 phases. When one passes the first milestone, he becomes arrogant. This is the very beginning of knowledge, right? This is like someone who searches some things online and hears some fatwas here and there, and he wants to challenge, right? Because what? I know something now. I know a fatwa on this, right? So I'm going to go challenge everyone else, and I'm going to make everyone feel inferior because I know and they don't. A'udhu billah, right? So when one passes the first milestone, he's arrogant. When he passes the second, he grows humble. And when he surpasses the final one, why does he become humble in the second milestone? Because he realizes there's so much more to learning than what he understands. He realizes that, hey, you know what, I don't have this thing all figured out. I need to spend a lot more time adjusting, reconsidering, assessing, and so on and so forth. And when he surpasses the final milestone, he realizes he knows nothing. Why does he realize that? Because he realizes my knowledge in comparison to Allah's knowledge is not even worth mentioning. Allahu Akbar. My knowledge versus Allam al-Ghuyub, don't even say it. All right, so, and this is of course a very refined, it's easy to say this with the tongue, it's hard to actually live by it. May Allah Azza wa Jal make us of those who are humbled by their knowledge. Allahumma ameen. And the scholars, they teach us those most severely punished on the Day of Judgment are scholars whom Allah has not blessed to benefit from their own knowledge. It's a source of great punishment on the Day of Judgment. And that's why there's this book in Aqidah that says, and this book is by Imam Al-Dardir, it's called Al-Kharida. He says, وَعَالِمٌ بِعِلْمِهِ لَمْ يَعْمَلًا يُحْشَرُ قَبْلَ عُبَّادِ الْوَثَنِ. And a scholar who doesn't live by and act according to his knowledge will find himself in a place in hellfire lower than those who worshipped idols, right? إِنَّ الْمُنَافِقِينَ فِي الدَّرْكِ الْأَسْفَلِ مِنَ النَّارِ وَلَنْ تَجِدْ لَهُمْ نَصِيرًا. So he's speaking to the severity. This is why يُحْشَرُ قَبْلَ عُبَادِ الْوَثَنِ, because the Prophet ﷺ says that this person will be among those first exposed to the blaze of hellfire. أَوَّلُ مَنْ تُسَعَّرُ بِهِمُ النَّارُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. It's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. So it's very scary, this idea, this notion of being someone who's aware, yet choosing not to act upon your awareness is a very dangerous one. And we mentioned this recently in a class, that there will be a person in hellfire who will be squealing in pain. And they say that his insides will be protruding from his body. And the people of hellfire will gather upon this individual and say, what brought you here? What are you doing here? We didn't think you're going to be in hellfire. So he says, he'll be told, he will say to them, كنت آمر بالمعروف ولا آتيه وأنهى عن المنكر وآتيه. I would tell people to do good things, I wouldn't do them myself. I would prohibit people from wrongdoing, and I would engage in it myself. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. Right. So these are, some things that we are going to get exposed to now as we read selections from the work of Imam Ghazali on the importance of knowledge being steered and directed by a strong sense of spirituality. Right. So I'm going to leave this slide over here as we begin our book and take a look at it. So if you could please open the book to page 16, where we find the author's introduction. And the good thing about this book is it is both in English and Arabic. So the person who's able to read Arabic and wants to get exposed to that can find the page by page, the Arabic on the right, the English on the left, right? So I'm going to read parts of this. This beginning actually, is a very powerful one for me. So look, he says here, in the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. All praise to Allah, as much as His right to be praised. And peace and blessings be upon Muhammad ﷺ, His messenger and slave, and upon his family and his companions after him. To proceed, and Imam Ghazali doesn't waste any time here. You who are desirous of acquiring sacred knowledge, expressing in yourself a sincere longing and a passionate thirst for it, know that if your aim in seeking knowledge is to compete, show off, outdo your peers, garner attention, and amass the debris of this world, hutam ad-dunya, right? Then you are on your way to rendering your religion null and void, destroying yourself, and selling your eternal life for this present one. In this introduction, he doesn't waste any time, brothers and sisters. This does not just apply to scholars, shuyukh, and teachers. It also applies to students of knowledge. You know what? It applies to everyone who seeks to be in the countenance of the masjid, and the angels that are in the masjid, and the mercy of Allah Azza wa Jal that's in the masajid. Every person aspiring any position right now, every single one of us, to another person who is not here right now is in a position of influence, right? When they come to the masjid, I'm in a position of influence. What am I? Am I a teacher? Am I an imam? Okay. Am I a volunteer? Am I a person who runs the function of a masjid? Or am I a daily masjid goer who is a guide for those who are newcomers to the masjid? Everyone needs to think about these words, right? What am I seeking by the nearness to deen? Am I seeking something that is truly of substance, or am I seeking something that is so fleeting and so passing? Look at this. He says, your transaction is empty. Your business is profitless. And the person who teaches you in this case is nothing less than an accomplice in your transgression, a partner in your loss. Why is he speaking so aggressively? Imam Ghazali came at a critical time in our history in which he found people using deen to amass worldly prosperity, using their power and their position for corruption, not for goodness. So he's speaking to a reality where deen and religiosity can end up ruining the person. And in fact, we find that this is not far off from what we experience today as well. We're in danger of this too. So he says here, why is the person who teaches you in this case is nothing less than an accomplice in your transgression? Why? Why is that? Because if knowledge is made all about information, and I give this knowledge to someone who will not know how to use it, then instead of this knowledge making them better, it'll ruin them. That's what he's talking about. It is possible, and this is especially possible when you're learning fiqh, when you learn about ahkam, and what is halal and what is haram. You will learn that there are what people call loopholes, right? There's ways that I could get around certain things, certain ahkam. So, am I going to use this information to truly come closer to Allah, or am I going to use it for another purpose? What does he say? What does he go on to say? He can be compared to one who sells a sword to a highway robber. Because why? Knowledge is powerful. Knowledge is influential. And it needs to be steered in the right direction. For as the Messenger of Allah ﷺ said, indeed, whoever helps with a sin by even half a word is a partner in it. But if, in seeking knowledge, your intention and aim between Allah Most High and yourself is to gain guidance, and not simply the transmission of information, then glad tidings be to you. The angels will spread their wings for you as you walk, and the fish in the sea will ask forgiveness for you as you strive. Right? This is, brothers and sisters, seeking to gain knowledge that makes us better people is, one of the most virtuous things that you could do. There's a reason why the Prophet ﷺ said the gardens of Jannah are gardens of remembrance of Allah. And of course, among the most effective form of remembrance is seeking knowledge. There's a reason why. The Prophet, why is he saying these words? The angels will spread their... That's in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. When I truly pursue getting to know my deen, getting to know the Quran, getting to know hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, getting to know about his life, getting to know about spirituality, when I pursue these things, I am truly becoming in sync with the rest of Allah's creation that remembers Him. And when I have this very clearly, I'll be able to be a guide for others wherever I go. When I go to work, I'll be a guide for people who aren't Muslim. When I go to school, I can be the same. I'll be a guide for others. I can really save, by the blessings of Allah, someone from the fire of hell. Think of that, brothers and sisters. That's something powerful, to be there for someone as a guiding light, whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim. Whether if they're Muslim when they're in a time of need, and you're the one there to direct them and guide them and bring them back closer to Allah Azza wa Jal. Allahu Akbar. That would be an enduring source of reward that'll never end. You should know before all else that guidance, which is the fruit of knowledge, has a beginning and an end, an outward aspect and an inward essence. There's no way to reach the end without mastering the beginning, just as there is no way to recover the inner essence of it until you have arrived at an understanding of its outward. Here I'm going to point you to the beginning of guidance for you to see where you stand and determine what your heart intends. If you find your heart inclining towards it and you find yourself compliant and receptive, then look to the ends of it and immerse yourself in the oceans of this knowledge. If on the other hand, you find that in taking stock of it, your heart puts off starting it or asks for more time in responding to its demands, then know that the part of your lower self wanting knowledge is the self that commands to evil, which has risen up out of obedience to the accursed shaitan. Brothers and sisters, one of the things that we're going to get exposed to are the pitfalls of the shaitan. How does the shaitan really get to us? Every single one of us, no matter how much we know or how little we know. The shaitan has this way to influence and impact our lives. He could find you in such great happiness euphoria and joy, and he could cause something to come about in your day that ruins it, ruins the entire day. Wallahi, every single one of us on this journey experiences that, brothers and sisters. The shaitan does not want us to experience prosperity. He doesn't want us to experience happiness. And that's why the part of the beginning of this path, look at what he says here. إِنَّ أَشَدَّ النَّاسِ عَذَابًا يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ عَالِمٌ لَمْ يَنْفَعْهُ اللَّهُ بِعِلْمِهِ. One of the people who will be punished most on the Day of Judgment is a person who knew but didn't benefit from what he knew. And the Prophet ﷺ would seek refuge in Allah. He would say, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min ilmin la yanfa' wa qalbin la yakhsha' wa amalin la yurfa' wa du'a'in la yusma'. This is the dua of the Prophet ﷺ. He would say, oh Allah, I seek refuge in you from knowledge that doesn't benefit, and a heart that isn't submissive, and actions that aren't raised to you, and dua that is not answered by you. You'll find that in the English. I translated it my own translation. But you'll find that he mentions that there. And he continues to expound. If you go to page 20 and turn the page, he says, understand, may Allah have mercy on you, that there are three classes of people who seek knowledge. First is a man who seeks knowledge to make it his provision on the way to the next life, and intends by it nothing other than the countenance of Allah Most High and the home of the hereafter. He's the winner. Second is a man who seeks knowledge to assist him in his present life and attain by it honor, good standing, and wealth, right? I want to be a doctor. I want to be an engineer. I want to be a person in politics, a person who's influential, right? What am I seeking? He's aware of what he's doing and feels in his heart that his state is not good and his intention is not right. Sometimes, if we speak to ourselves, we could feel, if the heart's alive, I will feel it. If I talk to myself, and as they say, in order to really become immersed in the spiritual path, I need to talk to myself a lot, right? I need to talk to myself a lot. They said, talk to yourself until they say you're crazy. Talk to yourself until they say you're crazy, right? That's what they say. The scholars teach us this. What does that mean? I need to have conversations with my nafs. If my heart's alive, I'm going to know something's off on the inside. I'm not doing this for the right reason. Something's bothering me. He's of those who put themselves in jeopardy. If he dies before making repentance, it must be feared that he will come to a bad end, and his fate is under the divine will. But if such a man is divinely guided to repentance before the arrival of his appointed time, and if he adds good works to his knowledge and redeems himself from his past shortcomings, become one of the winners, right? For truly one who repents of a sin is like one who has no sin at all, right? We're all in this. Look, right now, let's just set your heart to it. Set your heart to it. I need to fix my soul. My soul's not right. So there's something wrong there's a lot of things that are wrong about me. Let me just accept this realization. Because once I accept this realization, I could actually build myself up. The more I convince myself, hey man, I'm good. Look, I'm going to classes, I'm spending time in the masjid, I'm doing all my salawat, I'm consistent in doing this and that. Once I convince myself that it's all good, then guess what? Everything on the inside will shut down. I'm not going to get better. I'm only going to get worse. Right now, let me just tell myself, my soul, my nafs, I know you, right? There's this beautiful hikmah of the aphorisms of Ibn Ata'illah, which Shaykh Yasser explains here in the masjid every Thursday in Dhikr and Fikr. This beautiful aphorism. What does it say? It says, أَجْهَلُ النَّاسِ مَنْ تَرَكَ يَقِينَ مَا عِنْدَهُ لِظَنِّ مَا عِنْدَ النَّاسِ. The most ignorant human being is the one who abandons the certainty he has of his own self for the assumption that others have of him. I know what بَلِ الْإِنسَانُ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ بَصِيرًا. As the Quran says, every person is a witness over his soul, even if he was to put forth his excuses. Talk to your nafs. Oh, my nafs, I know you. You're weak, you're vulnerable, you're insecure. You've done things that if the people in the public would know what you've done, they would not even stand to look at you, let alone engage you, right? One of the scholars, he teaches us this. He says beautifully, if sins had a scent, no one would stand to be in my presence. This is how the scholars, they teach us. If sins had a scent, no one would stand to be in my presence, right? How many times I sat in a gathering and put on a good look and a good face, yet I know deep down inside, in that very gathering, I've had thoughts in my head that are so toxic, that, thoughts of arrogance, thoughts of ignorance, thoughts of bad assumption, thoughts of envy, and so on and so forth. That if our thoughts were to be immediately exposed to those right around us, any honest person with himself would say, I'd be left with no friends. Imagine the people I talk to, if they could hear immediately what's going on in my head right now, they wouldn't want to talk to me anymore, right? That's the way to begin this spiritual path. That's what he's telling us. The second person is at very high risk. And then he says the third person is a man who has fallen completely under shaitan's sway. This man uses his knowledge only to increase his wealth, boast of his rank, and take pride in his large following, right? Oh, man. Now, all right, he's talking about a specific reality. But again, we need to take liberty in seeing where else this applies. I need to take liberty in that. Large following, right? How many times between me, myself, and I, if I'm a person of social media, which probably most of us are, if I'm a person of social media, how often have I posted something and looked at my post once, twice, and thrice to see who liked it, how many people have engaged it, and so on and so forth. And you know what? I might even remember who likes my posts. And if I have a friend on my friends list who doesn't like my posts, guess what? I'm not going to like their posts back, right? You don't like my posts, why should I like your posts, right? And the ignorance just has no bounds, right? The possibility of ignorance has no bounds, right? So I need to be honest with myself. Again, one of the most critical characteristics on the spiritual path is what? Being honest with oneself, being genuine. If I'm honest, there's no way I would have a good opinion of myself. If I'm honest, there's no way I will have a good opinion of myself. Unless what? I don't really expose myself to much scrutiny. I'm willing to scrutinize everyone and everything else in life, but not myself, right? So this is the third one. He says, this man, all right, with his knowledge, he explores every avenue, hoping to gratify all the desires he has for this world. In spite of all this, he still secretly believes he has a high place with Allah, because he adorns himself with the outer characteristics of the learned, following in their footsteps in dress and manner of speech, all the while rushing with frenzied desire toward the worldly, inwardly and outwardly. And he goes on to mention more and more in this vein. The last thing I'm going to mention from this introduction, I went overtime for this first session that we have, is on page 23. He says in this, فَإِن قُلْتَ فَمَا بِدَايَةُ الْهِدَايَةِ لِأُجَرِّبَ نَفْسِي فِيهَا. If you then ask, what is the beginning of guidance, that I may test myself thereby, he says, فَعْلَمْ أَنَّ بِدَايَتَهَا ظَاهِرُ التَّقْوَى. Know that its beginning is the outward form of taqwa, God consciousness, and its end is the inward reality of God consciousness. Hence, there is no ultimate bliss except through taqwa. And guidance does not come but to those who are conscious of Allah Azza wa Jal. Why is the beginning outward taqwa? Why is that the case? Right? So it will take time for spiritual realizations to settle in. It's going to take time. These are things like, the true meaning of sabr and yaqeen, patience and certainty and gratitude and trust in Allah. The true meanings of these concepts, they take a lifetime to build out within my soul. It doesn't start on the inward. And I know this is like counterintuitive. Everything on the outward is built on the inward, right? But I need to begin engaging outwardly in acts of goodness, devotion, and hopefully that outward expression will lead to the betterment of the inward. That's what he's saying. The beginning of it is Zahir al-Taqwa. You're going to find that this reminds me of another statement of Imam Ghazali. What does he say? This other statement. He said, by the way, this is a very profound statement, guys. Just pay attention to what he's saying here. He says in another statement طلبنا العلم لغير الله فأبى أن يكون إلا لله. Our beginning on this path of knowledge started for all the wrong reasons. My beginning on the path of spirituality may have started for all the wrong reasons. Meaning that it wasn't clear in my mind yet the extent of this path. I mean, who has it all figured out from day one? Right? When I learned to pray, I'm focusing on the outward. All right, ruku' is like this, sujood is like that, Fatiha is like this. Focusing on the outward rulings. I can't do this while I'm fasting, and I must do that, and so on and so forth. It starts off by learning these things, and it starts off with a very narrow thing, a very narrow direction in my mind. All right, I need to pray. I'm going to do that 5 times a day. I need to fast. I'm going to do that every Ramadan. I need to give my zakah. I'm going to give this amount of money. And then I'm going to find with time that the more I really consume my time with acts of devotion and goodness on the outward, it's actually going to broaden this narrow thing and to make it wider, 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 wider. And I'm going to find that this ends up taking up my entire existence. Meaning what he's trying to say here is, look, things are going to start out small spiritually. But the more I continue to build and grow, I'm going to find that these spiritual concepts and pillars are so strong into the ground that it'll take a whole lot to make them collapse. And what's the proof of this? From the Quran, there are certain things that are mentioned. I mentioned this in many lectures. Let's see if anyone who regularly attends those, if you could remember. There are two spiritual concepts that have this time/experience factor to them in the Quran. What are they? What are they? 2 spiritual concepts mentioned in the Quran that have this time/experience factor to them. What are they? Not ihsan. Who said sabr? Why do you say that? Do you know the verse? No, not that verse. I'm talking about the experience factor, patience, right? وَكَيْفَ تَصْبِرُ عَلَى مَا لَمْ تُحِطْ بِهِ خُبْرًا. Surah Al-Kahf, right? What does he say? How on earth can you be patient with something you've never experienced? You know what? This proves it, all right? وَمَنْ يَتَصَبَّرْ يُصَبِّرُهُ اللَّهُ. Right? First, you're going to need to force your body to experience and exude patience. Right? When you first teach your child how to fast at 7 years old, does the child truly grasp why they're fasting? They might know the answer, but they won't grasp it. And that's why the easiest thing to tell a child who's 7 years old, why do you fast? To feel with the poor. And that's a beautiful thing to say, but that's not why we fast. There's a deeper meaning. When I'm fasting at 7 years old, my body is going to require a whole lot of patience because it's not easy, right? It's not easy to do that. My body's being exposed to this for the very first time. But with time, that physical experience with fasting will become a spiritual one. And I'll start feeling sweetness in fasting because I know it's truly about being a true servant of Allah. Tahqiq al-ubudiyya. When Allah tells me don't eat, I won't eat. When Allah tells me eat, I will eat. And I'll hasten to eat. That's why it's very virtuous at Maghrib. Rush to eat. Why? Because Allah said so. That's it. And then, so I become realizing that I am this vessel, this vehicle that's directed and steered by its maker and its creator. I allow myself to be in full submission. That's a spiritual. A 7-year-old's going to understand that? No. They're going to fast for years on end. Their body's going to get used to it. And eventually these spiritual concepts are going to settle in. So that's patience, the first one. What's the other one? That has this time/experience factor to it. I'll give you a hint. Before the hint, does anyone know the answer? It is linked with the age of 40. There you go. Well, who knows the ayah? Rabbi awzi'ni an ashkur. Right? Oh Allah, give me the capacity to be grateful. What does that mean? You're going to try to train your kids to be grateful when they're young. But guess what? They won't truly understand the meaning of gratitude until after a lifetime, perhaps. Right? You should be grateful for having a mother and father who care about you. What's going on in the kid's mind when the parents tell him that? Oh my goodness, you always say this. Come on, why can't you ever say anything else? I understand, I should be grateful, yeah. What's the next thing? All right? But then, when this kid grows up, and now they have kids of their own, and they realize how difficult it is to take care of a newborn baby or a toddler, or مش عارف إيه, they start realizing, oh man, I can't believe my parents endured all of these difficulties when they were raising me. And better yet, trying to raise a teenager, which is its own unique creation of Allah. Teenagers are their own unique creation of Allah Azza wa Jal. They work very strangely. But anyway, so the point is, and people who've gone through their teenage years will realize that it's an immense challenge. That is just constant up and down and trying to steer this young person in the direction that is not going to ruin their life, right? And it's very difficult to try to protect your kids from drugs, from illicit relationships, from bad friends, from so on and so forth, right? So, again, so on and so forth. These things, so again, these profound words that we just spent a whole lot of time with. وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ فَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ بِدَايَتَهَا ظَاهِرُ التَّقْوَى. Its beginning is outward in nature. But with time, if I'm going down the right path, it's going to become a very inward reality, very spiritual in nature. فَلَا عَاقِبَةَ إِلَّا لِلتَّقْوَى وَلَا هُدَى إِلَّا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. The outcome of affairs is for people of true taqwa. And no guidance is except for people of taqwa. That's what we should aspire for. And then he says in the very end of this, thus there are two parts to it. And in what follows, I will expound you briefly the outward manifestation of taqwa in both its parts. That's what he's trying to explain in this book. Good pause. Let's take a pause here, inshallah. And we will continue in 5 minutes. So we're going to stop the stream, inshallah. And we're going to continue in 5 minutes at 1:45, inshallah. I know that we shared a schedule. I like to talk a lot. So, unfortunately, so that's why the timings are going to end up adjusting accordingly, right? So let's take a 5-minute break. Jazakumullah khair. You could get tea, coffee,